The rugged Montana Territory forged extraordinary individuals during the tumultuous decades following the Civil War. Legendary trackers like Ghost Walker Jenkins, the notorious Blackwell brothers, and the ruthless Victor Rattlesnake Donovan all carved their names into the wilderness with blood and grit. But perhaps none left a more fascinating legacy than Eleanor Eagle Eye Monroe, a woman whose mere whisper of a name would later cause the most hardened outlaws to change direction. A seemingly ordinary widow with amber eyes that could track a falcon's shadow across mountain ranges, and whose Winchester spoke only in the precise language of life and death.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you.
As she once calmly told her son, people mistake quietness for weakness, until that quiet person shows them why silence was always a choice, not a limitation. Join me as we explore the remarkable tale of the woman they called Eagle Eye, the widow of Whispering Pines Valley, who demonstrated that sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one you never see, watching you from the tree line. Whispering Pines, Montana Territory, fall of 1878. The settlement was like many others scattered across the northern frontier, a collection of weathered buildings surrounded by towering pines, where ambition and survival intertwined beneath the vast mountain sky. The kind of remote outpost where folks valued self-sufficiency above all else, which is precisely why Eleanor Monroe chose it. She arrived on a crisp September morning, guiding a wagon loaded with modest possessions, her young son, Timothy, perched beside her. Her faded blue calico dress caught the mountain breeze as she navigated the rutted path into town. Those who witnessed her arrival would later recall two distinct things: the weathered leather satchel she kept within arm's reach at all times, and her unusual amber eyes that seemed to register every detail of her surroundings without appearing to look at anything in particular. The townspeople of Whispering Pines were accustomed to families seeking fresh beginnings in the territory, but something about Eleanor Monroe and her quiet, watchful son triggered subtle ripples of curiosity. She carried herself with an unassuming confidence that some mistook for the caution of a woman alone in the world, an assumption that would one day prove dangerously misguided for some. Marshal Frank Sullivan, who had maintained order in the growing settlement for nearly a decade, observed the newcomers from the steps of his modest office. "There's two types who seek out places this far from civilization," he later wrote in his journal. "Those escaping something terrible, and those searching for something worth finding. Mrs. Monroe struck me as possibly being both." Dr. Hannah Reeves was the first to establish a genuine connection with the mysterious widow, treating Timothy for what Eleanor described as a fall from a tree near their campsite. The doctor couldn't help but notice certain inconsistencies. The boy's injuries, while minor, showed evidence of a more significant impact than a simple fall. More telling was how the child remained perfectly still during treatment, displaying a pain tolerance unusual for a boy of 7. But what truly caught the physician's attention were Eleanor's hands as she comforted her son. Though she dressed and spoke like a genteel woman of modest means, her hands told a different story, calloused and strong, with small, nearly invisible scars across the knuckles and palms. These weren't the hands of a sheltered housewife, but of someone intimately familiar with the hardships of wilderness survival. Dr. Reeves was a woman who understood the value of discretion on the frontier. The question she chose not to ask spoke volumes about the respect Eleanor quickly earned in the small community. Within 2 weeks of their arrival, Eleanor had purchased the old Jenkins place, a sturdy cabin with a small clearing nestled against the foothills 3 miles outside town. The previous owner, a trapper who'd lost his leg to frostbite 2 winters prior, had been eager to sell and return east. She paid in gold double eagles, each coin gleaming like her unusual eyes as she counted them out carefully for Mr. Peterson. "The town's notary. There's something about this valley," she told Benjamin Cooper, the local mercantile owner, as she purchased supplies for repairs and winter preparations. "Something that feels right for Timothy and me." Her assessment wasn't wrong, though she couldn't have foreseen how fiercely she would one day defend this home she was creating. The widow settled into her new property with methodical efficiency that raised few eyebrows, but privately impressed her scattered neighbors. She reinforced the cabin walls against the coming winter, established snares for small game, planted a late garden of hardy root vegetables, and started keeping chickens. She paid for goods promptly, attended the occasional community gathering, though she rarely participated actively, and politely declined most social invitations. When addressed, she responded with soft-spoken courtesy and a smile that was genuine but somehow guarded, as if portions of herself remained carefully locked away. This reserved demeanor earned her the affectionate local nickname, the Quiet Widow Monroe. Young Timothy, with his mother's amber eyes and solemn demeanor, soon found his place at the settlement's small schoolhouse. The boy was uncommonly observant and displayed an unusual knowledge of nature that fascinated his teacher, Miss Abigail Foster. He could identify animal tracks that even local children couldn't name, and demonstrated an uncanny sense of direction. During outdoor lessons, "Your son has remarkable natural abilities, Mrs. Monroe," Miss Foster commented during a parent meeting. "He seems to notice details that escape most adults, let alone children." "His father was the same way," Eleanor replied simply, offering no further explanation. Benjamin Cooper, whose mercantile served as the settlement's unofficial gathering place and information exchange, began noticing peculiar patterns in the widow's purchases. She acquired ammunition in quantities that suggested more than occasional hunting, explaining it as preparation for the harsh winter ahead. Her eyes lingered on territorial notices and wanted posters, though she never remarked upon them. Most curiously, she had an instinctive habit of positioning herself in corners of the store, maintaining clear sightlines to both the entrance and the back door. As the first snows of winter dusted Whispering Pines, no one suspected that the quiet widow with the unusual eyes was anything more than she appeared. No one knew that her strong, capable hands had once guided military expeditions through territories where even seasoned trappers feared to venture, or that her keen vision had once saved an entire cavalry unit from an ambush in terrain so treacherous. It had been deemed impassable, but that was about to change. The Blackwell gang was moving north toward Whispering Pines after a bloody bank robbery in Helena, and with them came a storm that would strip away the careful disguise Eleanor Eagle Eye Monroe had constructed for herself and her son. The air grew heavy with tension as whispers of the Blackwell gang's approach reached Whispering Pines through stagecoach drivers and telegraph messages. Stories of their particular brand of cruelty preceded them, not just robberies and killings, but deliberate acts of terror designed to prevent resistance in the next town they targeted. Marshal Sullivan had weathered his share of trouble in his years wearing the badge, but the approaching threat of Jackson Blackwell and his brothers, men infamous for their particular hatred of lawmen, had etched new lines of worry across his weathered face. In his mercantile, Benjamin Cooper watched Eleanor Monroe examine the latest territorial notices with that same quiet intensity she brought to everything. Her eyes lingered on one in particular, a detailed description of the Blackwell gang's recent activities, including the execution of a marshal and his deputy, in a small settlement not unlike their own. "Terrible business," Benjamin commented, trying to draw his customer into conversation. "Word is, the Blackwells are heading this way. 3 brothers and their gang, maybe 12 men in all. Marshal Sullivan's called a town meeting for tomorrow.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Evening. Eleanor's response was characteristically brief, but something in her tone made Benjamin pause. Some men mistake isolation for vulnerability, the widow said softly, carefully folding the remainder of her purchased fabric. They forget that those who survive in remote places do so because they've learned to be resourceful. That same afternoon, Dr. Hannah Reeves made an unexpected visit to the Monroe cabin, finding Eleanor splitting firewood with practiced efficiency. Timothy sat nearby, whittling what appeared to be a wooden animal with remarkable skill for a child his age. "Town council's meeting tomorrow night," the doctor said without preamble, "to discuss preparations for the possibility of the Blackwells coming through our valley. Sullivan's looking for volunteers to form a defensive committee." Eleanor continued her work, her movements precise and economical. "Good people with good intentions," she replied, setting another log on the chopping block, "but inexperience can be as dangerous as the threat itself." "Then what would you suggest?" Hannah asked, studying her friend's controlled movements. For just a moment, something flickered in those amber eyes, something cold and calculating that seemed starkly at odds with her widow's persona. "Preparation. Information. Advantage," Eleanor answered quietly, bringing the axe down with perfect precision. Then the moment passed, and she was once again just a widow preparing for winter. The doctor wasn't the only visitor that day. As evening approached, Marshal Sullivan himself rode out to the Monroe place. He found Eleanor on the porch, mending what appeared to be one of Timothy's shirts, while her son practiced his reading. "By lantern light, Mrs. Monroe," he said, remaining mounted as courtesy dictated when calling on a lone woman with a child. "Thought I should personally inform you about the town meeting tomorrow. We might have trouble coming our way." "Kind of you, Marshal," she replied, her hands never pausing in their work. "But frontier life has taught me that trouble rarely announces itself properly. It tends to arrive whether we're prepared or not." Something about her words, about the way her hands moved so steadily across the fabric, triggered a memory in Sullivan's mind. 6 years ago, during his time as a deputy in Wyoming Territory, he'd heard stories about a female scout who had worked with the army, a woman with uncanny tracking abilities who could read landscapes like most people read books. She reportedly saved countless lives during the tense years of negotiation with the Crow Nation, finding paths and identifying threats that seasoned trappers had missed. The scouts and soldiers had called her Eagle Eye, though her real name had never circulated widely. She had vanished from official records shortly after a violent altercation with a group of deserters who had murdered her husband, an army captain. As the sun began to set over Whispering Pines, painting the mountains in shades of lavender and gold, more rumors arrived by telegraph. The Blackwells had raided a stagecoach station 40 miles south, leaving few survivors. They were traveling north, marking their path with characteristic violence. In town, preparations began in earnest as households gathered extra supplies and men checked their weapons. But out at the Monroe cabin, Eleanor calmly helped Timothy with his reading lessons before tucking him into bed with a story. "Mom," the boy asked, his amber eyes, so like his mother's, serious in the lamplight. "Are bad men coming?" Eleanor smoothed his dark hair back from his forehead, her touch gentle, though her eyes remained alert. "There are men coming who do bad things," she corrected carefully, "but they won't harm you or anyone in this valley, if I can help it." "Because of what you taught me?" Timothy asked. "About watching and listening?" A rare, genuine smile softened Eleanor's features. "That's right. Remember what I've told you about the eagle? It sees everything from above," Timothy recited. "But nothing sees it until it's ready to be seen." "Exactly." She kissed his forehead. "Now sleep. Tomorrow, we have preparations to make." After Timothy drifted off, Eleanor moved silently through the cabin. She knelt before the large stone hearth and carefully removed a specific stone from the base, one that appeared identical to all the others, but was in fact meticulously crafted to conceal a hiding place. From this cavity, she withdrew an oilskin-wrapped package. When unfolded on the table, it revealed a military-grade telescope, a compass of unusually fine quality, and a small, leather-bound book filled with detailed maps and notes in a precise, educated hand. For nearly an hour, she studied these materials, by lamplight, occasionally making new notations. Her face, in these private moments, bore little resemblance to the reserved widow the townspeople knew. Here, alone with her true self, Eleanor Eagle-Eye Monroe displayed the focused intensity of a strategist mapping out a battlefield. The writing of this story requires meticulous attention to detail, building a world where nothing is quite what it seems. Now let's continue with our tale of the widow whose past is about to collide with her present. Dawn broke over Whispering Pines with a crystalline clarity that only mountain air can provide. Eleanor Monroe had been awake for hours, moving through a series of preparations that would have seemed peculiar to anyone who might have observed them. She dressed Timothy with particular care, including an extra layer beneath his usual clothes and sturdy boots that would withstand rough terrain. Into his pockets went a small compass, a sheathed pocket knife, and a carefully folded piece of paper with precise instructions written in her neat hand. "Remember our special places," she told him quietly over breakfast. "If anything happens in town today, you go to the first one and wait. Count slowly to 500. If I haven't come by then, proceed to the second place." Timothy nodded solemnly, displaying none of the confusion or fear one might expect from a child receiving such instructions. Instead, his young face showed the serious concentration of someone performing an important, well-rehearsed duty. "And if you have to go all the way to the third place," Eleanor prompted, "open the box there and follow the map inside," he recited. "Perfectly. Don't stop for anyone except Dr. Reeves or Marshal Sullivan, and only if they know the special words. Good boy." She touched his cheek gently. "Today we'll go to town for supplies. I need you to be my second set of eyes. Watch everyone, especially strangers." As they drove their small wagon toward town, Eleanor maintained a casual demeanor, but her gaze continuously swept the landscape with practiced precision. She noted fresh tracks on the trail that suggested at least 2 riders had passed this way before dawn, unusual for the remote path they traveled. In town, the atmosphere was charged with tension. Groups of men gathered outside the marshal's office, while women moved purposefully between households, organizing supplies and safe locations for children. The town meeting the previous night had clearly galvanized the community into action. Eleanor guided their wagon to Cooper's Mercantile, her movements unhurried despite the underlying urgency she clearly felt. As Timothy helped unload empty preserving jars they were returning, she noticed a stranger lounging against the hitching post 2 buildings down, a man whose casual pose was belied by the alertness in his eyes as he surveyed the street. A scout, an advance man checking law, the town's defenses and routines. Benjamin Cooper greeted them with strained cheerfulness as they entered his store. "Mrs. Monroe, Timothy, good morning to you both. Quite a commotion today, isn't there?" "Indeed," Eleanor replied mildly, handing him her supply list. "I thought it prudent to stock up given the circumstances." As Cooper gathered her items, Marshal Sullivan entered the Mercantile, his expression grim but controlled. He nodded to Eleanor. "Mrs. Monroe." "Young Timothy, good to see you both in town." His voice carried the practiced calm of a man working, hard to prevent panic. "I'd recommend finishing your business quickly and returning home. We've had reports the Blackwells may be closer than we initially thought." "Thank you for the warning, Marshal," Eleanor responded. maintaining her role as a concerned but composed widow. "We'll be on our way shortly." It was then that Timothy, standing near the store's front window, tugged gently at his mother's skirt, a signal they had clearly established between them. Eleanor casually moved to straighten his collar, using the motion to glance out the window. 3 riders had entered the far end of the street. Their posture, their weapons, and their calculated spacing as they rode marked them clearly as men accustomed to violence. One man peeled off to speak with the stranger Eleanor had noticed earlier. "Marshal," she said quietly, her voice suddenly carrying a different quality, more authoritative, more precise. "Those men aren't just passing through." Sullivan's hand instinctively moved toward his gun as he stepped to the window, careful to stay partially concealed by the frame. "Blackwell scouts," he confirmed grimly. "Likely checking our defenses before the main group arrives." Eleanor's amber eyes narrowed slightly as she studied the men's movements. "No," she corrected with quiet certainty. "Those are the Blackwell brothers themselves. Jackson Wesley and the youngest, Daniel. They've left their gang behind to reconnoiter personally." Sullivan turned to her, surprise evident on his face. "How could you possibly know that?" Instead of answering, Eleanor knelt before Timothy, her hands steady on his shoulders. "Remember your instructions. The time to follow them is now." The boy nodded once, his young face serious but unafraid. Eleanor looked up at the marshal, and in that moment Sullivan saw something change in her eyes, a transformation so profound it was as if a different person suddenly occupied her skin. "Marshal." "Sullivan," she said, her voice now carrying unmistakable command, "I need you to create a distraction in approximately 3 minutes. Something that will draw their attention toward the livery stable, away from the path my son will take out the back of this building." Before Sullivan could respond, she turned to Cooper. "Benjamin, I need your shotgun, 20 shells, and whatever. A coil of rope you have in stock, add it to my account." Both men stared at her, momentarily stunned by the shift in her demeanor. "Now, gentlemen," she added quietly, "lives depend on how quickly you move in the next few minutes." It was her tone, the absolute certainty of someone accustomed to being obeyed in crisis situations, that spurred them into action. Cooper wordlessly retrieved the requested items, while Sullivan, still confused but responding to the authority in her voice, moved toward the door. "Who are you really, you?" he asked, pausing at the threshold, Eleanor eagle-eye. Monroe straightened to her full height, the careful disguise of widowed gentility falling away like an unneeded cloak. "Someone who knows exactly what Jackson Blackwell is capable of," she answered, her amber eyes cold as mountain lakes in winter, "and exactly how to stop him." As Eleanor Monroe checked her Winchester and secured additional ammunition in her dress pockets, the carefully constructed life she had built in Whispering Pines over the past 8 months flashed through her mind. The quiet routine she had established had served its purpose well, providing Timothy with stability while keeping them both safely anonymous. Their daily life had followed a rhythm designed to appear ordinary while actually serving as continuous. Preparation for the danger she always knew might find them. Each morning began before dawn, with Eleanor teaching Timothy to move silently through the forest surrounding their cabin. "Awareness before action," she would remind him as they practiced identifying birds by their calls and animals by the subtle signs they left behind. After these lessons, they would shift to what appeared to be normal homesteading activities. Eleanor tended their vegetable garden with the same meticulous attention she had once given to mapping uncharted territories. Timothy attended to the chickens and helped with household chores before heading to school in town, carrying his books and his secret set of survival instructions. Twice weekly, Eleanor would take him to a different, special place, hidden caches she had established throughout the valley, each containing supplies, weapons, and maps that would lead him to safety if they were ever separated. To Timothy, these expeditions seemed like special adventures with his mother. To Eleanor, they were essential insurance against the past she could never fully escape. The community had embraced them with the frontier hospitality typical of settlements that understood the value of each new family. Benjamin Cooper had extended credit during their first difficult winter months without being asked. Dr. Hannah Reeves made regular social calls that Eleanor recognized were partially to check on their welfare. Miss Foster at the schoolhouse had taken a special interest in Timothy's education, lending him advanced books when she discovered his quick mind. Eleanor had carefully cultivated relationships that appeared normal while strategically establishing allies. She volunteered to help with the town's record-keeping, which gave her access to information about everyone who passed through Whispering Pines. She offered her services as a seamstress, which created legitimate reasons to visit homes throughout the settlement and learn their layouts. She contributed special herbal remedies to Dr. Reeves, drawing on knowledge gained during years of wilderness expeditions. Now, as she prepared to face a threat she had long anticipated, Eleanor reflected on how this quiet life had become precious, and to her not just as a hiding place, but as a genuine home. "Mrs. Monroe," Marshal Sullivan's voice broke through her thoughts, "I need you to explain yourself. How do you know so much about the Blackwells?" Eleanor secured the shotgun Cooper had provided and met Sullivan's gaze directly. "Marshal, we have approximately 2 minutes before those men become suspicious about why you entered this store and haven't come out. I suggest you create that distraction now so my son can reach safety, and I'll explain everything once he's secure." Sullivan studied her for a long moment, then nodded decisively. "Cooper, take the boy out the back. My deputy's behind the apothecary. Get Timothy to him." He turned back to Eleanor. "I'll trust you for now, Mrs. Monroe, but only because we're short on options." "Fair enough," she replied, checking the shotgun's action with practiced hands. As Benjamin ushered Timothy toward the back door, Eleanor knelt quickly before her son. "Remember everything I taught you," she said softly. "I'll find you at the special place." Timothy's amber eyes, so like her own, showed understanding beyond his years. "I'll be careful, Mom. You too." The simple exchange carried the weight of countless drills and preparations. With one last touch to his cheek, she sent him with Cooper, while turning her attention back to Sullivan. "I need 15 seconds after your distraction begins," she instructed. "Then meet me behind the livery." Sullivan nodded grimly before striding out the front door, calling loudly to his deputy about checking those horses at the livery. As his voice drew the attention of the Blackwell brothers, Eleanor slipped out a side window, moving with the silent efficiency that had once made her the most valued scout in 3 territories. The past she had tried to outrun was now the only thing that might save her son and this town she had come to call home. 8 months earlier, Eleanor and Timothy Monroe had arrived in Whispering Pines with little more than a wagon of possessions and the hope of anonymity. Their journey had begun 2 years before, following the brutal murder of Captain Thomas Monroe by deserters he had been sent to apprehend. Thomas had been a respected cavalry officer, known for his fair treatment of indigenous peoples and his stand against corrupt officials who sought to profit from tribal conflicts. His death, officially listed as killed in the line of duty, had been much more sinister than military reports indicated. Eleanor had been nearby when it happened, returning from a scouting expedition. She had watched, hidden, as the deserters led by former Lieutenant Jackson Blackwell ambushed her husband. Even with her exceptional skills, she'd been too far away to prevent the killing, forced to witness as they executed Thomas for his role in exposing their involvement in weapons trafficking. That night, as she held her husband's body under the vast Wyoming sky, Eleanor Eagle Eye Monroe made a vow. Justice would come to the men responsible, not through military tribunals or territorial courts, but through her own particular skills. She had tracked the deserters for months, systematically eliminating each man involved in the ambush, until only Jackson Blackwell and his brothers remained. The Blackwells, however, had powerful allies. When they realized who was hunting them, they used these connections to retaliate. Eleanor's identity as the legendary scout Eagle Eye was leaked to criminal elements throughout the territories, along with a substantial bounty. What had begun as her pursuit of justice became a desperate flight to protect herself and her son. For 2 years, they had moved from settlement to settlement, staying just ahead of both the Blackwells and the various bounty hunters drawn by the reward. Whispering Pines, remote, self-sufficient and off the main transportation routes, had seemed the perfect place to disappear while she planned her next move. Now, as Eleanor crouched behind stacked lumber near Cooper's Mercantile, watching Marshall, Sullivan's distraction unfold, she knew her carefully constructed sanctuary had been compromised. The Blackwells' arrival was no coincidence. Somehow, they had tracked her here. Sullivan was performing admirably, creating a convincing commotion about suspicious horses at the livery stable. The 3 Blackwell brothers turned their attention in that direction, allowing Timothy and Cooper to slip unnoticed toward the rear of the settlement. Eleanor used the momentary diversion to move toward her predetermined observation point behind, the gunsmith's shop. From this vantage, she could see the 4th man, the stranger she had noticed earlier, watching the proceedings with professional interest. This would be Eli Carter, the Blackwell's tracker. His presence confirmed her worst fears. They hadn't stumbled across Whispering Pines by accident. They had been hunting her specifically. As the minutes ticked by, Eleanor's mind worked with the same precision that had once allowed her to guide military expeditions through supposedly impassable terrain. She needed to understand their plan. Before she could counter it effectively, the Blackwell brothers' presence in town, without their full gang, suggested they were still in the reconnaissance phase. They wouldn't risk a full assault until they had confirmed her identity and assessed the town's defenses. This gave her a narrow window of opportunity. Sullivan concluded his performance at the livery and began making his way toward their rendezvous point. Eleanor moved silently to meet him, careful to remain out of sight of the main street. "Your son's safe with my deputy," Sullivan informed her as they ducked into the narrow space behind the livery stable. "Now, Mrs. Monroe, if that's really your name, I think you owe me some answers." Eleanor nodded, keeping her voice low. "My real name is Eleanor Monroe. That much is true. What I didn't share is that before I was widowed, I served as a scout for the Army under the designation Eagle Eye. My husband was Captain Thomas Monroe of the 7th Cavalry." Sullivan's eyes widened in recognition. "Thomas Monroe. I remember hearing about his death. Ambushed by deserters, wasn't he?" "That's the official report," Eleanor confirmed grimly. "What isn't in that report is that the deserters were led by Jackson Blackwell, formerly Lieutenant Blackwell, who was trafficking weapons to hostile factions to prolong conflicts and profit from army supply contracts." She paused, checking their surroundings before continuing. "Thomas discovered their operation and was preparing to report it when they killed him. I witnessed it from a distance, too far to save him, close enough to identify every man involved." Understanding dawned on Sullivan's weathered face. "And now they're hunting you because you know the truth." "They're hunting me because I've been hunting them," Eleanor corrected flatly. "I've eliminated 7 of the 10 men involved in my husband's murder. Only the Blackwell brothers remain." Sullivan studied her with new eyes, reassessing everything. He thought he knew about the quiet widow who had settled in his town. "So you're not just running from them," he said slowly. "You're the one they're afraid of." "They should be," Eleanor replied, her amber eyes cold as she checked the Winchester's action. "But they've also put a substantial bounty on me. which means I'm not the only one Timothy needs protection from. Before Sullivan could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the main street. Shots rang out, followed by shouts and the sound of running feet. "That's not their style," Eleanor said sharply. "The Blackwells wouldn't start something this early in their reconnaissance." They moved quickly to the corner of the building, gaining a partial view of the street. What they saw confirmed Eleanor's assessment. Two strangers, not the Blackwells, had drawn weapons on Daniel Blackwell, the youngest brother. "Bounty hunters," Eleanor murmured. They must have recognized the Blackwells and decided to claim the reward on them. The situation was deteriorating. Rapidly, Jackson and Wesley Blackwell had taken cover and were returning fire while townspeople scattered in panic. The fourth man, Eli Carter, was nowhere to be seen, which concerned Eleanor more than the gunfight. "This changes everything," she told Sullivan urgently. "The Blackwells will assume this is a trap set for them. They'll regroup with their main force and return in full strength." Sullivan processed this information quickly. "How much time do we have?" Their gang was reported 40 miles south yesterday. Assuming they've continued north, they could be as close as Granite Ridge, less than 2 hours' ride. Eleanor's mind was already racing ahead, formulating a new plan. Once the brothers return with news of resistance, they'll attack with everything they have. The marshal nodded grimly. "I need to organize the town's defense. We've got maybe 20 men who can handle weapons." "That won't be enough," Eleanor stated flatly. "Not against the Blackwells. They have at least 12 experienced gunmen, and they don't take prisoners." She made a quick decision. "I need to get to Timothy, then retrieve some supplies from my cabin. There are preparations I can make that might give us an advantage." Sullivan gave her a measuring look. "You're planning to fight rather than run." "This is our home now," Eleanor said simply, "and I'm tired of running." For a moment the marshal's face showed grudging respect. Then he nodded. "Do what you need to do. I'll focus on getting the townspeople organized." As they prepared to separate, Eleanor added, "One more thing, Marshal. The Blackwells don't know I've settled here. They're tracking rumors. Don't let anyone use my name or mention Timothy. The fewer people who connect us to this situation, the better our chances." Sullivan agreed, then hesitated. "Mrs. Monroe, Eagle." "Whatever your preference." "Eleanor is fine," she interjected. "Eleanor, then. When this is over, assuming we survive, we'll need to have a longer conversation about justice and vigilantism in my jurisdiction." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "If we survive, Marshal Sullivan, I look forward to that discussion." With that, they parted ways, Sullivan heading toward the gathering townspeople near the church, and Eleanor slipping between buildings toward the rendezvous point where Timothy waited with the deputy. The bounty hunter's ill-timed intervention had accelerated the timeline drastically. What might have been a careful game of cat and mouse had now become an imminent battle for survival. Eleanor moved with purpose, her mind already mapping terrain advantages and defensive positions. She found Timothy with Deputy Williams behind. "The schoolhouse?" The boy's face serious but composed as he spotted her approach. "Mom," he said simply, relief evident in his voice. Eleanor quickly checked him over, then nodded to the deputy. "Thank you for keeping him safe." Williams, a young man with keen eyes and a nervous trigger finger, seemed unsettled by the unfolding situation. "Marshal's orders, ma'am, though I admit I'm a bit confused about what's happening." "It's about to get worse," Eleanor told him directly. "The Blackwells will return with their full gang, likely before nightfall. I need to get Timothy somewhere. Secure, then help prepare the town's defense." The deputy's eyes widened. "You're going to fight, but you're exactly the person you want beside you when Jackson Blackwell comes calling," she interrupted crisply. "Now I need a horse. Mine is still at Cooper's." To his credit, Williams adapted quickly to this new reality. "Take mine. It's behind the schoolhouse. I'll report to the marshal." Eleanor nodded her thanks, then turned to Timothy. We need to go to special place number 3, the boy understood immediately. The cave above the North Ridge? Exactly. It's stocked and defensible. She lifted him onto the deputy's horse, then mounted behind him. We'll collect what we need, then I'll bring you there before returning to help the town. As they rode swiftly away from Whispering Pines, Eleanor felt Timothy's small body tense against her. "What is it?" she asked, instantly alert to his reactions. She had trained him to notice details that others missed. "There's a rider watching from the ridge," he said quietly, pointing toward a distant outcropping. Eleanor followed his indication, her exceptional vision confirming his observation. A lone figure sat motionless on horseback, observing the town from a concealed position. "Good eye," she praised him. "That's why we're taking the creek path. It's harder to track." They guided the horse down a steep embankment into a shallow creek, using the water to obscure their trail as they made their way toward the Monroe cabin. Eleanor maintained vigilant awareness, scanning their surroundings continuously. "Mom," Timothy ventured after several minutes of silence, "are they the men who killed Dad?" The question pierced her heart, though she had been expecting it eventually. She had never hidden the truth from Timothy, believing that understanding real dangers was better than being protected from them. "Yes," she answered simply. "The Blackwell brothers led the men who ambushed your father." Timothy absorbed this information with the solemn thoughtfulness that sometimes made him seem older than his 7 years. "Is that why we've moved so many times?" he asked. "Because you were hunting them?" "Partly," Eleanor admitted. "I found some of the men responsible, but the Blackwells discovered I was tracking them and put a price on our heads. We've been running from bounty hunters as much as from them." The boy nodded, processing this information. "But we're not running this time." It wasn't a question, and the certainty in his young voice momentarily tightened Eleanor's throat with emotion. "No," she confirmed. "Whispering Pines is our home now. These are good people who have welcomed us. I won't abandon them to the Blackwell's cruelty." They reached the cabin 10 minutes later, approaching cautiously until Eleanor was certain no one had preceded them. Inside, she moved with practiced efficiency, gathering specific supplies and weapons that had remained carefully hidden during their months of peaceful residence. From beneath a loose floorboard came a leather case containing specialized tools, wire, small metal mechanisms, and components that Timothy recognized from their practice sessions building snares. From behind a false panel in the pantry, she retrieved additional ammunition and a second rifle. A compartment built into the chimney yielded small cloth bundles of what appeared to be herbs and powders. "Take only what's on your list," she instructed Timothy, who immediately began collecting his own pre-arranged emergency supplies: extra, clothing, preserved food, his personal journal, and the small wooden box containing mementos of his father. Within 15 minutes, they had packed everything according to a system they had rehearsed many times. Eleanor secured their supplies on the horse, then conducted a final sweep of the cabin, removing any documents or items that might provide information about them. As they prepared to leave, Timothy paused at the doorway, looking back at the home they had worked so hard to create. "We'll come back," Eleanor promised, recognizing the emotion behind his hesitation. "This isn't goodbye, it's just a tactical retreat." The boy nodded, squaring his small shoulders. "I'm ready." They rode north toward the ridge, following game, trails and natural features that provided cover from observation. Eleanor maintained a steady pace, balancing the need for speed against the importance of moving undetected. "Remember," she told Timothy as they approached the hidden cave that served as their most secure emergency shelter, "the same rules apply. Count to 500 after I leave. If I haven't returned by full dark, use the back exit and follow the map to Reed Station." "I know, Mom," he assured her with the confidence of a child who has practiced these instructions countless times. "I'll maintain the shelter and stay alert." The cave entrance was concealed behind a natural formation of boulders, invisible unless one knew exactly where to look. Inside, Eleanor had established a secure haven over the previous months, small caches of food and water, bedding, medical supplies, and a carefully concealed ventilation system that allowed them to maintain a small fire without revealing smoke. As she helped Timothy settle into this emergency home, Eleanor felt the familiar weight of responsibility pressing upon her. For 2 years, she had balanced her desire for justice against her duty to protect her son. Now, those imperatives seemed impossibly at odds. "I have to go back," she told him softly, checking his emergency supplies one final time. "Marshal Sullivan needs every advantage I can provide if the town is to survive what's coming." Timothy's amber eyes, so like her own, met hers steadily. "I know. Dad would have done the same." Eleanor pulled him into a fierce embrace. Jackson Blackwell's rage was palpable as he and his brothers regrouped in a secluded ravine 3 miles outside Whispering Pines. The unexpected attack by bounty hunters had left Daniel with a bullet graze across his arm and their carefully planned reconnaissance in shambles. "Those weren't town deputies," Wesley observed, cleaning his younger brother's wound with a whiskey-soaked bandana. "Bounty hunters looked like the Miller cousins from Dakota Territory." "I don't care who they were," Jackson snapped, pacing like a caged mountain lion. "What I want to know is how they found us, and why they were waiting in that backwater town." Eli Carter, their scout and tracker, had maintained a careful distance from the confrontation, observing from horseback on the ridge. Now he approached the brothers with his characteristic methodical calm. "It's not a coincidence," he stated flatly. "The information was good. She's been here, the woman you're hunting." Jackson stopped pacing, his cold eyes fixing on Carter. "You're certain? You saw her?" "Not directly," the tracker admitted. "But there were signs. A woman and child matching the description arrived about 8 months ago, purchased the old Jenkins. Place outside town, keeps to herself mostly. That fits her pattern," Daniel interjected, wincing as Wesley tightened a bandage around his arm. "New identity, remote location, lies low." Jackson resumed his pacing, mind working through the implications. "The bounty hunters must have gotten the same information we did, but they made their move too soon. Sloppy. Worked out for us," Wesley commented. "Now we know she's here without revealing our hand." "No," Jackson contradicted sharply. "Our hand is revealed. Even if she wasn't in town to see us, someone will describe us. She'll know we've found her." He turned to Carter. "Where's the Jenkins place?" "North of town, about 3 miles. Isolated cabin near the foothills. And the rest of our men? Where are they now?" "Camped at Granite Ridge as instructed. 12 men, well armed and waiting." Jackson considered this. Information, his expression hardening into resolve. "Send word to bring them up. We'll hit the town at dusk, cut off any escape routes, then find her and the boy." Daniel looked up from examining his wounded arm. "The whole town? That's a lot of witnesses, Jack." "No witnesses," Jackson stated coldly. "Every person in that settlement is either with her or will be soon. We burn it all and finish this hunt once and for all." Wesley's weathered face showed a flicker of concern. "That's going to bring more heat than we've ever dealt with. Military patrols, federal marshals." "They'll never connect it to us," Jackson interrupted. "The official report will blame it on a Sioux raiding party. There have been tensions in this region for months. The army's been expecting an incident." The casual cruelty of this statement hung in the air. Even among the brothers, there was a moment of silence as they contemplated the scale of violence Jackson was proposing. "You're still thinking like an officer," Daniel observed quietly. "Planning false flag operations." Jackson's eyes flashed dangerously. "I'm thinking like a survivor. That woman has hunted our associates across 3 territories. She won't stop until we're dead, or she is." He looked at each of his brothers in turn. "Make no mistake, Eleanor Monroe is the most dangerous enemy we've ever faced. Her husband was a nuisance with his moral crusade against our business. She's something else entirely." Carter, who had remained silent during this exchange, finally spoke. "There's something else you should know. The town's marshal, Sullivan, he's no ordinary frontier lawman. Former Army scout himself, served with distinction during the campaign south of here." This new information shifted the atmosphere among the brothers. Professional soldiers understood the threat posed by a competent military scout. 2 experienced scouts defending a town of civilians, Wesley mused, changes the calculation. Jackson's expression remained implacable. "Changes nothing. We have numbers, firepower, and the element of surprise. By morning, Whispering Pines will be ashes, and Eleanor Monroe's skull will be decorating my saddle horn." He turned to Carter. "Ride to Granite Ridge. Bring our men up, but keep them hidden until I give the signal. We attack at dusk." As Carter mounted his horse and rode south, Jackson pulled a tarnished captain's insignia from his pocket, a trophy taken from Thomas Monroe's body years earlier. He rolled it between his fingers, his face set in lines of cold determination. 2 years of cat and mouse ends tonight," he murmured. "Let's see how legendary Eagle Eye really is when her son is in our crosshairs." Back in Whispering Pines, Marshal Frank Sullivan had converted the town's small church into an emergency headquarters. The pews had been pushed aside to make room for a makeshift planning table where maps of the surrounding area were spread out. Around him gathered the town's defenders, shopkeepers, ranchers, and laborers who now found themselves preparing for a battle most had never imagined. "The Blackwells won't come at us directly," Sullivan explained, tracing likely approach routes on the map. "They're military trained, at least Jackson and Wesley are. They'll establish a perimeter, cut off escape routes, then push inward." Benjamin Cooper, who had served briefly during the Civil War, studied the map with a concerned expression. "With the number of men they reportedly have, they could surround the entire settlement." "That's their likely strategy," a voice confirmed. From the doorway, all heads turned to see Eleanor Monroe enter the church. She had changed from her usual modest dress into more practical attire. Canvas trousers tucked into sturdy boots, a fitted leather vest over a cotton shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded her amber eyes. A Winchester rifle rested comfortably in her hands, and a gun belt with 2 revolvers circled her hips. To the townspeople who had known her only as the quiet widow on the outskirts of their community, the transformation was startling. "Mrs. Monroe?" Miss Foster, the schoolteacher, asked in disbelief. Eleanor nodded briefly to acknowledge the reaction, then moved purposefully to the map table. "Marshal Sullivan has informed me of the situation," she stated simply, addressing the room. "I have experience with threats like the Blackwells, and I'm here to help defend our town." Sullivan, recognizing the importance of establishing her credibility without revealing her full identity, added, "Mrs. Monroe has significant military scouting experience. Her tactical knowledge will be invaluable." There were murmurs of surprise among the gathered townspeople, but the gravity of their situation quickly overshadowed curiosity about Eleanor's unexpected expertise. "The Blackwells favor dusk attacks," she continued, indicating specific locations on the map. "They'll position men here, here, and here, controlling the main roads and high ground. Their initial focus will be on preventing escape, rather than pressing an immediate assault." She traced a finger along the creek that ran behind the settlement. "This will be their blind spot. They'll consider it a secondary concern because it's difficult terrain for mounted men." Cooper leaned forward with renewed interest. "That could be our advantage, moving defenders through town unseen." Eleanor nodded. "Exactly. We need to establish defensive positions that appear obvious, drawing their attention while positioning our most effective fighters where they don't expect resistance. For the next 30 minutes, she outlined a defensive strategy that impressed even Sullivan with its thoroughness. The townspeople, initially skeptical of taking direction from a woman they had known only as a reserved widow, gradually recognized the depth of knowledge behind her calm instructions. "What about the women and children?" Dr. Hannah Reeves asked practically. "We can't evacuate them now. Where can they shelter safely?" "The root cellar beneath the mercantile," Eleanor replied, without hesitation. "It's stone-lined, with ventilation and a concealed exit that leads to the creek bed. We should move non-combatants there immediately, with supplies for at least 3 days." Sullivan raised an eyebrow. "You've scouted emergency shelters in town?" The ghost of a smile touched Eleanor's lips. "I make a habit of knowing escape routes, Marshal. It's kept me alive on numerous occasions." As the meeting concluded and people dispersed to their assigned preparations, Dr. Reeves approached Eleanor privately. "Your son?" she asked quietly. "Is he safe?" "As safe as possible," Eleanor confirmed, grateful for the physician's concern. "In a secure location outside town." Hannah studied her with newfound understanding. "I always sensed there was more to you than a grieving widow. The way you set Timothy's broken arm last winter, those weren't housewifely skills." "Field medicine," Eleanor acknowledged. "Necessary in my former profession." "And what profession would that be exactly?" The doctor pressed gently. Eleanor considered. Her answer carefully. "Their survival might depend on trust between key allies. I was an Army Scout," she said finally, "under the designation Eagle Eye. I specialized in enemy tracking and wilderness navigation." Hannah's eyes widened slightly. "That explains much, but not why the Blackwells have tracked you specifically to our town." "That's a longer story," Eleanor replied, checking her Winchester's action. "One that involves my husband's murder and my subsequent pursuit of justice." The doctor absorbed this revelation with remarkable composure. "And now they've found you instead." "They believe they have," Eleanor corrected, a cold determination entering her voice. "What they've actually found is the end of their hunt." Before they could continue their conversation, Deputy Williams burst through the church doors, breathless from running. "Rider approaching from the south," he reported urgently. "Single man. White flag. Says he has a message from Jackson Blackwell." Sullivan and Eleanor exchanged glances. "A parley?" the marshal wondered aloud. "Or a distraction?" Eleanor countered, already moving toward the door. "Let's find out which." The messenger waited at the edge of town, a white cloth tied to his rifle barrel. He was a hard-looking man, with the watchful eyes of someone accustomed to violence. Eleanor, Sullivan, and Cooper observed him from the shelter of the blacksmith's shop before approaching. "I don't recognize him from the original deserters," Eleanor murmured. "Must be newer recruitment." "How do you want to play this?" Sullivan asked, deferring to her experience. "I'll remain out of sight initially," she decided. "You and Cooper approach as the town's official representatives. See what he wants, but keep him talking while I circle behind." The men nodded and moved out into the street, while Eleanor slipped between buildings, using the skills that had once made her invisible to pursuing war parties. The messenger straightened as Sullivan and Cooper approached, his posture revealing military training beneath his outlaw appearance. "That's far enough," he called when they were 20 paces away. "I bring terms from Jackson Blackwell." "What kind of terms would a gang of murderers offer?" Sullivan responded, his hand resting near his holstered revolver. "Simple ones," the man replied with a cold smile. "Deliver the woman known as Eleanor, Monroe, and her son to us by sunset, and the town of Whispering Pines will be spared. Refuse, and no one in this settlement will see tomorrow's dawn." Cooper bristled visibly. "You threaten an entire town of innocent people over one woman." "Innocent?" The messenger laughed harshly. Anyone harboring Eleanor Monroe is far from innocent. Do you even know what she is? What she's done? Enlighten us, Sullivan suggested, deliberately drawing out the conversation as Eleanor had requested. She's a murderer, the man stated flatly. Killed 7 men across 3 territories, men who served honorably until she hunted them down. There's a $500 bounty on her head from private interests who want justice. Interesting definition of justice, Sullivan commented. I'd be curious to hear her version of events. The messenger's eyes narrowed. Then you admit she's here? I admit nothing, Sullivan countered smoothly, but I find it peculiar that armed men would threaten an entire settlement over rumors. As they spoke, Eleanor had circled behind the messenger, using the natural cover of outbuildings and afternoon shadows. Now she stood directly behind him, her Winchester aimed at the center of his back. It's not rumors that concern Jackson Blackwell, she called clearly, causing the messenger to stiffen in surprise. It's fear, the fear of justice for Captain Thomas Monroe's murder. The man started to turn, but froze when he felt the rifle barrel press against his spine. Don't move, Eleanor instructed coldly. Your white flag protects you only as long as I choose to honor it. Sullivan moved forward, disarming the messenger with practiced efficiency. Now, Eleanor continued, maintaining her position, you're going to deliver a message back to Jackson Blackwell. Tell him Eleanor Monroe sends her regards and a promise. What began in Wyoming ends today. Tell him I've buried 7 deserters who participated in my husband's murder. 3 graves remain to be filled. The color drained from the messenger's face as he realized who was behind him. You're her, you're Eagle Eye. I am, she confirmed, her voice carrying a quiet deadliness that made the man tremble visibly. And unlike the Blackwells, I don't threaten innocent communities. My quarrel is specifically with the men who ambushed and executed a United States Army officer under a flag of truce. She stepped back slightly, though her rifle remained trained on him. Ride back to your employers. Tell them Whispering Pines rejects their terms. This town is under my protection now. Sullivan gave the man a hard shove toward his horse. You heard the lady. Deliver that message word for word if you want to live to collect your pay. As the messenger mounted and rode swiftly south, Cooper turned to Eleanor with new respect in his eyes. That was quite a performance, he observed. Though I suspect it was no performance at all. The Blackwells needed to know their target is aware and waiting, she explained, watching the messenger disappear into the distance. It introduces an element of uncertainty to their planning. Sullivan nodded thoughtfully. You deliberately revealed yourself. Now they'll focus more on you than on the town. Precisely. Eleanor shouldered her Winchester. Jackson Blackwell is obsessive. Once he knows I'm actively opposing him, his tactics will become more personal and less strategic. That seems dangerously close to using yourself as bait, Cooper noted with concern. Eleanor's amber eyes remained fixed on the horizon. Sometimes the best defense is to control when and where your enemy strikes. The Blackwells want me. Let them focus on that desire while we prepare the real welcome. The 3 returned to town, where preparations were well underway. Men reinforced buildings with additional planking, established firing positions at strategic points, and moved supplies to designated areas. Women organized medical stations under Dr. Reeves's direction, prepared food for the defenders, and assisted families moving to the root cellar shelter. Eleanor approached the gunsmith's shop, where several men were distributing ammunition. We need to establish false targets, she instructed, drawing curious looks from the gathered defenders. Dress store mannequins in women's clothing. Place them near windows where lamplight will create silhouettes after dark. The gunsmith, a practical man named Harrington, immediately grasped her strategy. Make them waste ammunition and reveal their positions. Exactly. She turned to address the wider group. The Blackwells believe they're hunting civilians. They Don't expect military tactics or prepared defenses. We need to maintain that misconception as long as possible. As the afternoon progressed, Eleanor moved through town with tireless energy, adjusting preparations, instructing defenders on specific techniques, and establishing communication signals between defensive positions. Her quiet authority and obvious expertise gradually overcame any remaining hesitation about following a woman's tactical leadership. "She's something else," a rancher named Miller commented to Sullivan, as they watched Eleanor demonstrate how to create effective cover using ordinary furniture. "Hard to believe she's the same quiet widow who brings apple pies to church socials," Sullivan nodded thoughtfully. "People are rarely what they seem on the surface, especially out here. The frontier strips away pretense eventually." "You think we can hold against professional killers?" Miller asked bluntly. "With her?" Sullivan glanced toward Eleanor, who was now instructing several men on the most effective firing angles from the church bell tower. "We have a fighting chance. She knows. These men, how they think, how they fight, that's an advantage they don't expect us to have." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Eleanor sought a moment of solitude behind the church. Despite her outward confidence, concern for Timothy weighed heavily on her. The cave shelter was secure, but the knowledge that he was alone while such danger approached was difficult to bear. Dr. Reeves found her there, offering a canteen of water and her quiet presence. "Your son is resourceful," Hannah observed, correctly identifying the source of Eleanor's momentary withdrawal. "He has your observational skills and calm under pressure." Eleanor accepted the water gratefully. "He's had to grow up faster than any child should. 2 years of constant movement, always looking over our shoulders. Yet you've raised a remarkably balanced boy," the doctor noted. "Timothy shows none of the fear or anxiety one might expect from such circumstances. He's confident, insightful, and surprisingly optimistic." A small smile softened Eleanor's features. His father's nature. Thomas could find hope in the darkest situations. Her expression grew distant. "That optimism is what got him killed. He truly believed in military justice. Couldn't conceive that his own officers would betray him for profit." Hannah studied, her companion with professional interest. "And you've carried both the burden of his death and the responsibility for your son's safety alone since then." "Not entirely alone," Eleanor admitted quietly. "There were allies along the way. People who helped us disappear, provided information, offered temporary sanctuary." She turned to face the doctor directly. "Whispering Pines is different, though. For the first time since Thomas died, this place began to feel like home, not just a hiding place." "Then it's worth defending," Hannah stated simply. Eleanor's amber eyes regained their fierce focus. "Yes, absolutely worth defending." Their moment of reflection was interrupted by Deputy Williams, who approached with urgent news. "Dust clouds to the south," he reported. "Riders coming fast, at least a dozen." Eleanor checked the position of the sun, still an hour before dusk. "They're moving earlier than expected. The messenger must have conveyed our rejection of their terms." She strode purposefully toward the church, where Sullivan was coordinating the final defensive preparations. "They're coming," she informed him crisply. "Sooner than we anticipated." The marshal immediately began issuing orders to activate their defensive plan. Defenders moved to their assigned positions, last-minute supplies were distributed, and the signal was given to extinguish all visible lamps within the settlement. As Whispering Pines descended into strategic darkness, Eleanor checked her weapons one final time. The Winchester was loaded, both revolvers primed, and additional ammunition lined her pockets. More importantly, specialized traps and surprises had been positioned throughout the town's perimeter, the kind of tactical advantages that had made her legendary among military scouts. From her position near the church tower, she could see the distant dust cloud approaching from the south. The Blackwells were coming in force, confident in their numbers and firepower, expecting to overwhelm a helpless frontier settlement. What they would find instead was a carefully prepared defense coordinated by the very woman they had hunted for so long. A woman who had spent 2 years studying their tactics while eliminating their associates one by one. Eleanor's amber eyes narrowed as she tracked the approaching riders. "Come on, Jackson," she murmured. "Let's finish what you started in Wyoming." The hunters were about to discover they had severely underestimated their prey. The peculiar stillness that precedes violence settled over Whispering Pines as the last preparations were completed. Eleanor moved between defensive positions, offering final guidance to the townspeople, who had transformed overnight from peaceful settlers into a determined militia. The fear that had initially gripped them had crystallized into something more, focused, a collective resolve to protect their homes and families. "Remember," she instructed a group positioned in the mercantile's upper floor, "wait until they're fully committed to the street before you reveal your positions. Let them believe their initial entrance is succeeding." Benjamin Cooper nodded, adjusting his shotgun with hands that had steadied considerably over the past hours. "Just like you said, make them think they're encountering typical civilian resistance, not coordinated defense." "Exactly." Eleanor checked the firing angles from the windows. "Once the signal comes, 3 quick shots from the church bell tower, unleash. Everything you have for 30 seconds, then immediately relocate to your secondary positions." She moved on to the next group, stationed in the blacksmith's shop. The massive anvil had been positioned to provide cover, and the forge's brick walls offered better protection than most buildings in town. "Harrington," she addressed the gunsmith, who had established an impressive reloading station behind the anvil, "you're our ammunition coordinator. When defenders run low, they'll signal with a white cloth in the window. Have your runners use the covered route we established behind the buildings." The older man nodded grimly. "Already briefed the boys. They understand the importance of keeping our people supplied." As Eleanor continued her rounds, Dr. Hannah Reeves was establishing her medical station in the church basement, the sturdiest structure in town and centrally located to receive casualties from all defensive positions. She had transformed the simple space into a remarkably efficient field hospital with clear areas for triage, treatment and recovery. "I've trained 3 assistants," Hannah informed Eleanor when she stopped to inspect the preparations. "They can handle basic wounds while I focus on more serious injuries." Eleanor surveyed the organized supplies with professional appreciation. "This is impressive work, Doctor. Field medicine during the war," Hannah explained succinctly. 4 years with the Union Army taught me how to create hospitals in unlikely places." This revelation added new context to the physician's calm competence in crisis. "You never mentioned your military service," Eleanor observed. A shadow crossed Hannah's face. "Some experiences are easier left unspoken. I suspect you understand that better than most." The shared moment of recognition between 2 women who had witnessed humanity at its worst was interrupted by Marshal Sullivan's arrival. "They've stopped advancing," he reported, his expression troubled. "Holding position about a mile south of town," Eleanor frowned. "That's not their typical approach. Jackson prefers to maintain momentum once committed to an attack." "Could they be waiting for full darkness?" Hannah suggested. "Possibly." Eleanor considered the tactical implications. "Or they're planning something we haven't anticipated." She turned to Sullivan. "I need to get a better view of their position. The church tower should provide sufficient elevation." Together, they climbed the narrow stairs to the modest bell tower that crowned Whispering Pines' simple church. From this vantage point, Eleanor could see the entire settlement and the surrounding landscape. The southern approach, where dust had betrayed the Blackwell's arrival, the northern foothills, where Timothy waited in his hidden shelter, and the eastern and western flanks with their more challenging terrain. Using a brass spyglass she had retrieved from her hidden supplies, Eleanor carefully studied the distant figures, now stationary, on the southern road. "They've dismounted," she reported, adjusting the focus. "Gathered around someone, Jackson, presumably, examining something." Sullivan squinted in the same direction. "A map?" "No." Eleanor's voice sharpened with sudden concern. "Not a map. Something. Smaller, they're passing between them." She adjusted the spyglass again, then went completely still. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a new edge of urgency. "We need to relocate our defensive forces immediately. They're not attacking from the south." "What?" Sullivan turned to her in confusion. "But we can see them. What we see is a deliberate distraction," Eleanor interrupted, already moving toward the stairs. "The men on the road are examining a pocket watch. They're timing something, coordinating with another group we can't see." Understanding dawned on Sullivan's weathered face. "A flanking maneuver." "More than that," Eleanor corrected grimly. "The men we're watching aren't the main force. They're a diversion to fix our attention southward, while the real attack comes from..." A distant crack of breaking branches from the western edge of town completed her assessment. Without another word, they raced down the stairs, Eleanor already calling out revised orders to the defenders they passed. "Cooper, shift your men to the western positions. Harrington, get word to the northern lookouts to maintain vigilance. The southern approaches are faint." She turned to Sullivan as they reached the ground floor. "Jackson's divided his forces. What we're seeing to the south is probably less than half his men. The main group is approaching through the western ravine, a more difficult route, but one that offers better cover." Sullivan immediately dispatched runners to reposition their defenders. "How did you know?" "Because it's what I would have done," Eleanor replied, checking her Winchester. "And Jackson was trained by the same commanders I was. He's using terrain to mask his approach, a classic cavalry tactic adapted for bandits." Outside, the peaceful anticipation that had settled over Whispering Pines transformed into controlled urgency as defenders hurried to adjust to the new threat assessment. Eleanor's quick recognition of the tactical deception prevented the potential disaster of having their strongest defenses facing the wrong direction. "We need to determine their exact approach vector," she told Sullivan as they moved toward the western edge of town. "If they're coming through the ravine, they'll emerge near the lumber yard." The marshal nodded. "That area has less coverage than our southern approach. Fewer buildings, more open ground, which is precisely why we didn't expect them to choose that route," Eleanor acknowledged. "It offers less protection for attackers, unless they believe we're focused elsewhere." They reached the westernmost building, a storage shed at the edge of the modest lumber yard, and carefully positioned themselves to observe the ravine entrance without being exposed. "There," Sullivan whispered, pointing to a subtle movement. Among the trees, Eleanor narrowed her amber eyes, her exceptional vision picking out details invisible to most observers. "Two scouts. They're checking for defensive positions before the main group commits." She studied their methodical movements, recognizing the disciplined approach that betrayed Jackson's military background. "These aren't ordinary bandits. They're moving like trained soldiers, maintaining spacing, using available cover, communicating with hand signals." "How long until they realize we've detected them?" Sullivan asked. "Not long," Eleanor estimated. "The scouts will report minimal defensive presence on this flank. Jackson will interpret that as confirmation his deception worked." She made a quick decision. "We need to maintain that misconception, pull back all visible defenders from this area, make it appear unprotected, but position our shooters in concealed locations with overlapping fields of fire." Sullivan immediately dispatched a runner with these instructions, while Eleanor continued studying the ravine entrance. Her mind worked through the tactical implications. with the same precision that had once made her an invaluable military asset. "They'll send a small advance force first," she predicted. "Probably 5 or 6 men to secure the lumber yard as a position for the main group. Once they believe it's safe, Jackson will bring in the remainder of his force." The marshal looked at her with newfound respect. "You've done this before, predicted enemy movements." A ghost of a smile touched Eleanor's lips. "More times than I can count. It was my primary value to the army. Not just tracking, but anticipating hostile actions based on terrain and psychology." As they withdrew to coordinate the revised defense, Eleanor felt the familiar calm of combat awareness settling over her. The heightened perception and emotional detachment that had served her through countless dangerous situations. Her concern for Timothy remained a constant presence, but she compartmentalized it, focusing entirely on the immediate threat. Back at the church, which now served as their command center, Benjamin Cooper had assembled a group of the town's most capable defenders. "Mrs. Monroe has identified the true attack vector," Sullivan informed them, quickly sketching the situation on a roughly drawn map. "We are implementing a modified defense plan. Cooper, take 4 men and conceal yourselves in the lumber office. Miller, your group will spread through the outbuildings here and here." As Sullivan continued outlining positions, Eleanor added specific tactical instructions. "Don't fire until the main force has fully committed to the open area. Let the advance. Porty report back that the approach is clear." "What about the southern group?" Harrington asked. "Do we leave that flank undefended?" "No," Eleanor answered. "But we reduce coverage to essential positions only. Williams will maintain observation and signal if they begin to advance." With practiced efficiency, the defenders dispersed to their new assignments, moving with the quiet urgency of people who understood the stakes. Eleanor checked the angle of the sun. Perhaps 40 minutes of daylight remained, with dusk providing the partial concealment the Blackwells would likely use to launch their main assault. This brief interlude before combat, Eleanor found her thoughts turning to Timothy. The hidden cave was well stocked and virtually impossible to find without prior knowledge of its location. But maternal concern transcended rational assessment of safety. She had trained him thoroughly for situations like this. Yet he remained, a 7-year-old boy alone in wilderness that would soon be filled with desperate, violent men. Hannah Reeves approached quietly, offering a canteen of water and her perceptive presence. "Your son is safer where he is than he would be here," the doctor observed, correctly reading Eleanor's momentary preoccupation. "My mind knows that," Eleanor acknowledged, accepting the water gratefully. "My heart is less easily convinced." Hannah nodded in understanding. "The hardest part of being both a warrior and a mother is that each role demands your full attention when they conflict." The insight was so precisely accurate that Eleanor looked at the physician with new appreciation. "You speak from experience." "Own son was 12 when Antietam happened," Hannah replied, her eyes distant with memory. "He was with my sister in Philadelphia while I was treating wounds on the battlefield. I performed 23 amputations that day, knowing every moment that a Confederate breakthrough could reach civilian areas." The shared understanding between them required no further words. Both women had faced the impossible balance between duty and maternal protection, making choices that most would never comprehend. Their moment of connection was interrupted by a young boy, the blacksmith's son, who ran up with an urgent message. "Deputy Williams says riders are moving from the southern group," he reported breathlessly. 4 men heading east around the town." Eleanor immediately grasped the significance. "They're establishing a perimeter to cut off escape routes." She turned to Sullivan, who had joined them. "Jackson's implementing a full encirclement. He intends to trap everyone in Whispering Pines. Can we stop the eastern riders?" Sullivan asked, already calculating available forces. Eleanor shook her head. "We don't have the numbers to defend every approach. We need to concentrate our strength where the main attack will come. She made a quick strategic assessment. The eastern perimeter isn't an immediate threat. It's containment, not assault. We focus on defeating the western attack force. If we break them, the perimeter groups will withdraw. As final preparations were completed, an unexpected visitor arrived at the church, Miss Abigail Foster, the schoolteacher, who had been helping organize the women and children in the root cellar shelter. "Mrs. Monroe," she began hesitantly, "the children are asking about Timothy. They're concerned for their friend." Eleanor appreciated the teacher's thoughtfulness, even as she maintained her tactical focus. "Please tell them Timothy is safe in a special hiding place. He's helping by following important instructions his mother gave him." Miss Foster nodded, then lowered her voice. "There's something else. Several of the young boys are insisting they should help defend the town. I've contained them for now, but they're determined, especially the older ones." This unexpected complication drew Eleanor's full attention. Under no circumstances can children be involved in the defense. The Blackwells won't hesitate to shoot anyone, regardless of age. "I've told them that," Miss Foster affirmed, "but they've grown up on frontier stories of young heroes. They don't understand the reality of what's coming." Eleanor considered the problem, then reached a decision. "Bring the most insistent boys, only those 12 or older, to me. I'll give them critical responsibilities that will keep them safely in the shelter." When Miss Foster returned with 5 determined young boys, Eleanor addressed them with the same direct respect she would give adult defenders. "I understand you want to help protect your town," she began, studying their eager faces. "That shows courage and responsibility. But this situation requires more than bravery. It demands strategic thinking." She knelt to their level, her amber eyes serious. "The women and younger children in the shelter need protection and leadership. I'm assigning you as the shelter's interior defense force." The boys straightened at this official designation, especially when Eleanor continued outlining specific responsibilities: maintaining order, managing supplies, securing the entrance, and preparing for possible evacuation through the concealed exit. "This isn't a lesser assignment," she emphasized, recognizing their need to feel their contribution mattered. "If the Blackwells breach our outer defenses, you will be the last line of protection for the most vulnerable members of our community." The simple strategy worked, redirecting their youthful desire for heroics into genuinely useful roles that would keep them safely underground during the coming violence. As Miss Foster led them back to the shelter, Sullivan nodded approvingly. "Well handled," he commented. "Boys that age can be more dangerous to themselves than any enemy if their energy isn't channeled properly." "Timothy went through a similar phase," Eleanor replied, a brief smile softening her expression, convinced he was ready to hunt mountain lions at age 6. This rare personal detail revealed something of the normal maternal experiences that persisted. Alongside her extraordinary capabilities, a glimpse of the woman behind the tactical expert. The moment of relative calm was interrupted by a runner from the western observation post. "Movement in the ravine," he reported urgently. "At least 6 riders approaching slowly." "The advance party," Eleanor confirmed, immediately refocusing. "Remember, all defenders remain completely concealed. Let them enter the lumberyard and establish positions. No one fires until the signal, no matter what happens." Sullivan issued final orders to the messengers who would relay these instructions to the scattered defensive positions. As the runners dispersed, Eleanor checked her weapons one final time, then turned to the marshal. "I need to get to the lumber yard ahead of them," she stated. "There's a preparation I didn't have time to implement earlier." Sullivan frowned. "That's cutting it dangerously close. Their scouts could already be watching the area." "Which is why I need to go alone," she responded, already moving toward the rear exit. "I can approach unseen through the drainage culvert." Before he could object further, Eleanor slipped away, moving with the fluid silence that had earned her reputation among military scouts. She navigated between buildings, using shadows and existing cover with practiced ease, making her way toward the western edge of town without exposing herself to potential observers. The drainage culvert, a simple stone-lined channel that directed runoff from the nearby slopes, provided concealed access to the area behind the lumberyard. Eleanor moved through it in a half-crouch, her footsteps silent despite her haste. Emerging behind the lumber office, she paused to scan her surroundings, with the heightened awareness that had kept her alive through countless dangerous situations. Detecting no immediate threats, she moved quickly to a pile of supplies hidden earlier, coils of thin wire, small metal components, and several cloth-wrapped bundles. With practiced efficiency, she began implementing the specialized defensive measure she had planned, a series of trip mechanisms positioned across likely approach routes. These weren't lethal traps, but rather warning devices that would alert defenders to movement and potentially disrupt the coordinated advance of the Blackwell gang. As she worked, Eleanor maintained constant awareness of her surroundings, pausing frequently to listen for approaching riders. The sun had nearly reached the western mountains, casting long shadows across the lumberyard and creating the diminished visibility that would soon aid the attacker's approach. She had just finished securing the final trigger mechanism when her exceptional hearing detected the subtle sound of hooves moving slowly through soft earth. The advance party approaching the ravine exit. With fluid grace, she gathered her remaining supplies and retreated to a concealed position between stacked lumber, becoming virtually invisible in the deepening shadows. From this vantage point, she could observe the yard while remaining undetected. Within minutes, the first rider emerged cautiously from the ravine, a bearded man with a carbine resting across his saddle. He surveyed the area with professional attention before signaling to those behind him. 5 more riders followed, moving in practiced formation that confirmed Eleanor's assessment of their military background. They spread out methodically, securing the perimeter of the lumberyard while maintaining clear lines of sight between each position. The leader, a man Eleanor recognized as Martin Fletcher, one of Jackson's longtime associates, directed the operation with hand signals that minimized noise. 2 men dismounted to investigate the lumber office, while the others established defensive positions facing town. Eleanor remained perfectly still, controlling her breathing as one of the riders passed within 10 feet of her hiding place. Years of scouting hostile territory had taught her the art of becoming part of the landscape, present but unseen, like the hunting mountain lion whose stillness makes it invisible until the moment it strikes. Fletcher dispatched one rider back, toward the ravine, presumably to report that the initial area was secured. This confirmed Eleanor's prediction of their tactical approach. The advance party would establish a foothold, then signal the main force to move up. As darkness continued, to gather, Eleanor calculated timing with practiced precision. The main Blackwell force would likely wait for the messenger's report before advancing, giving the defenders approximately 15 minutes to finalize their preparations. When the rider disappeared into the ravine, Eleanor used the momentary distraction to extract herself from her hiding place, moving with ghost-like silence back toward the drainage culvert. Her specialized warning system was in place, and she had confirmed the enemy's approach pattern. Now she needed to rejoin Sullivan and coordinate the defensive response. She reached the church without detection, finding Sullivan, Cooper, and several other key defenders reviewing final positions. "The advance party has secured the lumber yard," she reported without preamble. 6 men positioned exactly as we anticipated. Fletcher is leading them. Jackson's keeping his closest allies with him in the main force. Sullivan nodded grimly. Williams reports the southern group remains in position, maintaining the feint. The eastern riders have established a blocking position on the main road out of town. "What about the northern approach?" Eleanor asked, concerned about the direction that led toward Timothy's hiding place. "Two riders observed heading that way," Cooper answered. "Appears they're completing the encirclement." Eleanor processed this information quickly, making final tactical adjustments. Jackson's being thorough. He's committed to a full containment strategy before launching his main assault. Turned to Sullivan. "Once the main force enters the lumberyard, we'll have a brief window of opportunity while they're concentrated in a relatively confined space. That's when we spring the trap." The marshal studied the rough map they had prepared. "The buildings provide good cover for our people. If we can pin them down in the open area of the yard." "Exactly," Eleanor confirmed. "We create a crossfire situation where their numbers become a disadvantage rather than an asset." As the defenders dispersed to their final positions, Eleanor felt the familiar clarity that preceded combat, a crystalline focus where extraneous concerns fell away, leaving only the essential calculations of survival and victory. She checked her Winchester one final time, then turned to Sullivan. "It's time. I need to get to my position in the loading shed. It offers the best angle to identify Jackson when he arrives." The marshal extended his hand, a gesture of respect between equals. "Good hunting, Eagle Eye." Eleanor accepted the handshake, acknowledging his use of her scout designation. "Keep your head down, Marshal. I didn't defend this town just to lose its lawman." As she moved toward her selected position, Eleanor's thoughts briefly turned to Timothy, safe in his hidden shelter. Everything she had taught him, every skill she had insisted he master, had been preparation for moments like this, when survival depended on discipline and careful planning. "Watch and wait," she whispered, an unconscious echo of the instructions. She had given her son countless times during their training sessions. "Let them come to you." The defenders of Whispering Pines settled into their concealed positions as darkness claimed the land. The advance party in the lumberyard lit two small lanterns, creating pools of light that would guide the main force while inadvertently making themselves perfect targets against the night. In the loading shed, Eleanor positioned herself behind stacked crates that provided both cover and a clear view of the yard. Through a narrow gap, she could observe the entire area without exposing herself to detection. The calm that settled over her now was absolute. The legendary focus that had once allowed her to track hostiles through impossible terrain, that had guided her through the systematic elimination of her husband's killers, that had kept her son safe through 2 years of constant movement. The Blackwells believed they were executing a carefully planned assault on an unprepared settlement. What they had actually done was ride directly into a trap set by the most formidable scout the frontier had ever produced, a woman whose tactical brilliance had been consistently underestimated because of her gender. As she heard the distant sounds of the main force approaching through the ravine, Eleanor Monroe permitted herself a cold smile of anticipation. The hunt that had begun with her husband's murder in Wyoming was about to reach its conclusion in this small Montana settlement. "Come on, Jackson," she murmured, her Winchester ready. "I've been waiting for you." The distant thunder of hoofbeats announced the approach of the Blackwell gang's main force. From her concealed position in the loading shed, Eleanor could feel the vibrations through the wooden floorboards. At least a dozen riders, moving with purpose through the ravine toward the lumberyard. She regulated her breathing, keeping her body perfectly still as she peered through the narrow gap between crates, Winchester ready, but not yet raised to firing position. The advance party tensed visibly at the approaching sounds, adjusting their positions and checking their weapons. Martin Fletcher moved to the edge of the yard, lantern raised to guide the incoming riders. "All clear," he called into the darkness. "Area secured." The riders emerged from the ravine in tight formation, hardened, men with weapons drawn, moving with the coordinated precision that distinguished them from typical bandits. Eleanor counted 14 in this group, bringing their total force to 20 men when combined with the advance party, a significant fighting force by frontier standards. Her amber eyes narrowed as she identified Jackson Blackwell leading the column, a tall figure with a distinctive cavalry officer's bearing despite his outlaw status. Beside him rode his brothers, Wesley, the tactical expert who had served as a sergeant before deserting, and Daniel, the youngest, who had been little more than a recruit when he followed his brothers into criminality. Jackson raised his hand, bringing the column to a halt as they entered the open area of the lumberyard. He surveyed the surroundings with professional caution, his gaze sweeping across the buildings that ringed the yard, buildings now silently occupied by Whispering Pines defenders. "Report," he ordered Fletcher crisply. "No resistance," Fletcher responded. "Town appears to be concentrating defenses on the southern approach, just as we anticipated. We've secured the yard without incident." Jackson nodded, then turned to address his assembled men. "Remember the plan. We move through town in 3 groups. Primary targets are the marshal's office and any defensive positions. Once those are neutralized, we secure the woman and the boy." Eleanor's finger rested lightly alongside the trigger, guard of her Winchester, her focus absolute as she continued to observe rather than engage. Patience had always been her greatest tactical advantage, the discipline to wait for the perfect moment rather than the first available opportunity. That moment was approaching rapidly as the Blackwell gang dismounted, gathering in the center of the yard to receive final instructions from their leader. 20 armed men now stood in the open area, creating exactly the concentrated target the defenders had planned for. In the church tower, Deputy Williams watched the scene through a spyglass, waiting for Sullivan's signal to initiate their defensive response. The marshal had positioned himself in the blacksmith's shop, coordinating with Cooper to ensure their crossfire would be maximally effective. As Jackson began assigning specific tasks to his men, his voice carrying clearly in the evening stillness, one of the horses suddenly snorted and reared, having disturbed one of Eleanor's warning devices. The thin wire triggered a small cascade of metal tools that clattered loudly to the ground near the lumber office. "Ambush!" Wesley Blackwell shouted, instantly alert to potential danger. The warning came too late. Sullivan's signal, 3 rapid. Shots fired from the blacksmith's position, cut through the night, followed immediately by coordinated fire from all sides of the lumber yard. The devastating first volley caught the Blackwell gang completely exposed, with minimal cover available in the open yard. 4 men fell in those opening seconds, others diving desperately behind water troughs, lumber stacks, and their own horses as bullets rained from multiple concealed positions. Jackson Blackwell, demonstrating the combat reflexes that had once made him an effective officer, found cover behind a heavy wagon and began returning fire toward the blacksmith's shop. "They knew we were coming," Daniel shouted from his position, behind a barrel. "The whole town was waiting for us." "Spread out," Jackson commanded, maintaining control despite the surprise. "Find their positions and concentrate fire." In the loading shed, Eleanor held her position, waiting for the specific opportunity she had planned for. The initial volley had deliberately targeted the gang's ordinary members rather than the leadership, a tactical decision to create confusion and divide their response. The Blackwell gang recovered quickly from the initial shock, their military training evident as they established defensive positions and began coordinated return fire. What had started as an ambush was rapidly evolving into a pitched battle between experienced fighters. 3 of the gang members attempted to reach the lumber office, seeking better cover and a defensible position. As they moved, they triggered another of Eleanor's preparations, a tripwire connected to suspended lanterns that crashed down, shattering and igniting the kerosene in a sudden wall of flame that separated them from their companions. This secondary trap created momentary chaos, allowing the town defenders to deliver another concentrated volley before the gang could reorganize. 2 more of Blackwell's men fell, and another clutched a wounded arm as he scrambled for cover. From his position in the blacksmith shop, Sullivan directed the defensive fire with calm efficiency, preventing the defenders from exposing themselves unnecessarily. Cooper's group in the mercantile maintained steady pressure from the opposite side, creating the crossfire that forced the Blackwells to divide their attention. Jackson quickly assessed their deteriorating situation, recognizing they had ridden into a carefully prepared trap. "Wesley," he called to his brother, "get to the office and signal the southern group. We need reinforcements." Wesley Blackwell made a dash toward the lumber office, using the wagon for cover until the last moment. As he ran, a single shot rang out from the loading shed, Eleanor's first contribution to the battle. The bullet struck with surgical precision, hitting Wesley's leg just above the knee. He stumbled, but continued forward, dragging the injured limb as he reached the relative safety of the office. Daniel Blackwell, witnessing his brother's injury, turned his fire toward the loading shed, peppering the wooden structure with bullets that splintered crates and punched through walls. Eleanor had already repositioned, moving silently to her secondary firing location at the rear of the shed. "Jackson!" Fletcher shouted over the gunfire. "Someone's using military tactics against us. This isn't typical townfolk defense." Jackson's expression darkened as he continued returning fire toward the blacksmith shop, the possibility that had concerned him, since receiving reports of Whispering Pines was becoming increasingly likely. Eleanor Monroe hadn't just hidden in this town. She had prepared it for their arrival. "Find her!" he ordered, his voice carrying above the chaotic exchange of gunfire. $500 to the man who brings me Eleanor Monroe. Alive. In the loading shed, Eleanor heard her name and permitted herself a cold smile. Jackson's focus on her was exactly what she had intended, diverting his tactical attention from the broader battle to a personal vendetta. The firefight intensified as both sides adjusted to the evolving situation. The Blackwell gang, though, caught by surprise, possessed superior numbers and weaponry. The town's defenders had the advantages of prepared positions and intimate knowledge of the terrain. From the church tower, Deputy Williams observed the southern group of Blackwells, men beginning to move northward, responding to Wesley's signal flare. This development required immediate adjustment to their defensive strategy. "Southern group advancing," he called down to a runner, who immediately raced to inform Sullivan. The marshal received this news with grim determination. "Cooper!" he shouted, across to the mercantile. "Take 3 men and reinforce the southern approach. They're trying to flank us." As Cooper and several defenders repositioned to address this new threat, the battle entered its second phase, a more fluid engagement where the initial advantages of surprise were giving way to a test of tactical adaptability. Eleanor used this transition to implement the next stage of her plan. Moving silently through a concealed exit at the rear of the loading shed, she circled behind the lumber storage area, approaching the office from the blind side. Wesley Blackwell was inside, his injured leg making him temporarily stationary as he reloaded his weapons. She reached the office window unseen, pausing to listen to the movements inside. Wesley was alone, focused on organizing ammunition while maintaining communication with his brothers through shouts and signals. With practiced silence, Eleanor raised herself to window level, bringing her revolver to bear on the unsuspecting man inside. Wesley sensed her presence at the last moment, turning with reflexive speed that spoke to years of combat experience. "You," he breathed, recognition and hatred mingling in his expression as he raised his pistol. Eleanor fired first, her bullet striking his shoulder with calculated precision, a wound designed to incapacitate without killing. Wesley's shot went wild as he fell backward, his pistol clattering to the floor. Before he could recover, Eleanor was through the window, covering him with unwavering aim. "Hello, Wesley," she said, her voice deceptively calm. "It's been a while." Despite his injuries, Wesley Blackwell maintained the defiant glare that had characterized him during his military service. "Should have known you'd be waiting for us. Jackson said you were in these parts, and yet you came anyway," Eleanor observed, quickly securing his dropped weapon while maintaining her aim. "Not your smartest tactical decision." "We've got 20 men," Wesley spat through gritted teeth. "You really think this town of farmers can stand against us?" Eleanor's amber eyes remained cold as she bound his wrists with practiced efficiency. "They're not standing alone." Outside, the battle continued to evolve as the southern contingent of Blackwell's men approached the town's edge. Sullivan had repositioned defenders to create a secondary defensive line, using the buildings along the main street as cover. Jackson, recognizing the changing dynamics of the engagement, called to his remaining men in the lumberyard. "Fall back to defensive positions, conserve ammunition, and hold until reinforcements arrive." The disciplined response to this command demonstrated why the Blackwell gang had survived and thrived where other outlaw groups had been captured or killed. Even under direct fire, they executed a coordinated repositioning, establishing a defensive perimeter that would be difficult to breach without significant casualties. In the lumber office, Eleanor completed securing Wesley Blackwell, ensuring he could not rejoin the fight. His injuries, while serious, were not life-threatening, a deliberate choice on her part. She needed him alive for what would come next. "Your brother thinks I've been running from him," she told Wesley conversationally as she checked the bonds. "One final time, he never understood that I've been hunting you all systematically. 7 of your original group are already dead. Soon it will be 10. Wesley's eyes widened slightly at this cold declaration. "You've changed," he observed. "The scout we knew in Wyoming wouldn't have executed men one by one." "The woman you knew in Wyoming died the day you murdered her husband," Eleanor replied, without emotion. "But you're right about one thing. I have changed. I've become much more efficient." Having secured her prisoner, Eleanor moved to the office window, assessing the current state of the battle. The initial exchange had resulted in approximately 6 of Blackwell's men either dead or seriously wounded. The remainder had established defensive positions that would make them difficult to dislodge without risking the town's defenders. The southern group was now engaging with Cooper's team at the edge of town, creating a second battlefront that divided the defensive efforts. This development required a tactical adjustment to prevent the town from being caught between 2 groups of attackers. Eleanor made a quick decision. Using Wesley's captured pistol, she fired 3 shots in rapid succession through the office. The roof, a signal they had established to indicate a significant development requiring Sullivan's attention. Within minutes, a young defender named Parker crawled through the underbrush to the rear of the lumber office, staying below the line of fire. "Marshall sent me," he whispered urgently. "What's happened?" "I've captured Wesley Blackwell," Eleanor informed him. "Tell Sullivan I'm implementing the second phase of our plan. He needs to maintain pressure on both fronts, but avoid direct assault for the next 20 minutes. As Parker retreated to deliver this message, Eleanor turned back to her prisoner. "Now, Wesley, you're going to help me end this standoff." The wounded man glared defiantly. "I won't betray my brothers." "You already have," Eleanor countered calmly, "simply by getting captured. Jackson knows I'll use you to my advantage. The only question is how painful the process will be for you." She moved to the office door, calculating angles and timings with practiced precision. "I need you to call out to your brother. Tell him you're injured but secure in the office. Tell him to send 2 men to help defend this position." Wesley's refusal was immediate and profane. Eleanor studied him dispassionately. "I didn't expect cooperation," she acknowledged, "but it would have been easier for everyone." Moving efficiently, she gagged Wesley to prevent him from warning his brothers, then positioned herself near the door, revolver ready. From her ammunition pouch, she withdrew a small cloth-wrapped bundle, one of the specialized tools she had prepared for this confrontation. Unwrapping it revealed a mechanical device of her own design, a simple but effective noisemaker that would draw attention without exposing her position. She activated it and placed it on the far side of the office, where it began emitting a rhythmic clicking sound, just loud enough to be heard amid the sporadic gunfire outside. As she had anticipated, Jackson responded to this unexpected sound. By directing two of his men to investigate the office where his wounded brother had taken refuge, they approached cautiously, using available cover until they reached the office door. "Wesley?" one called tentatively. "You okay in there?" When no response came, they exchanged concerned glances, then carefully pushed the door open, weapons ready. The interior appeared empty at first glance, Wesley having been positioned out of the immediate line of sight. The moment both men entered, Eleanor struck from her concealed position behind the door. The first man went down instantly, struck by the butt of her revolver at the base of his skull, a precise blow that rendered him unconscious without killing him. The second managed to turn partially, but her follow-up strike was equally effective, dropping him beside his companion. Within seconds, she had disarmed and secured both men, adding them to her collection of prisoners. Wesley watched with cold fury as his potential rescuers became additional captives. "3 down," Eleanor commented as she collected their weapons and ammunition. "I always find it interesting how men like your brother send others to do their dangerous work." Outside, Jackson had noticed the silence from the men he'd sent to check on Wesley. His tactical assessment of the situation was growing increasingly grim as the battle extended beyond their initial expectations. The town's defense was far more organized and effective than any civilian resistance they had previously encountered. "Daniel," he called to his youngest brother, "take Fletcher and circle behind the loading shed. Something's happening in the office." As Daniel and Fletcher moved to execute this order, Eleanor was already implementing the next phase of her strategy. She had now neutralized 3 of Blackwell's most experienced fighters without firing a shot, reducing his effective force while preserving her ammunition. Sullivan, receiving her message through Parker, adjusted the defensive fire to maintain pressure without exposing his people unnecessarily. He understood that Eleanor was executing a plan to divide and reduce the Blackwell force rather than confront it directly, a strategy that minimized risk to the town's defenders. In the office, Eleanor prepared for the arrival of Daniel and Fletcher, setting another trap that would continue the process of systematically reducing Jackson's command structure. She positioned the unconscious men as if they were maintaining watch at the windows, visible enough from outside to create the impression that the office was securely held by Blackwell's men. Daniel and Fletcher approached from behind the lumber piles, moving with the caution of experienced fighters. They reached the rear of the office without incident, finding the back door unlocked, an apparent oversight that was actually a deliberate element of Eleanor's trap. "Looks clear," Fletcher whispered, peering cautiously through the partially open door. "I can see Thompson at the window." Daniel nodded, and they slipped inside, expecting to find a defensive position established by their companions. Instead, they discovered an elaborately staged scene. Unconscious men propped at the windows, and Wesley bound and gagged in the corner. Before they could react, Eleanor emerged from the storage closet where she had concealed herself, both revolvers. "Trained on the newcomers. Drop your weapons," she instructed quietly, "or I put bullets through both your kneecaps." Fletcher, recognizing her instantly, started to raise his rifle in desperate defiance. Eleanor's response was immediate and precise, a single shot that shattered his right elbow, causing him to drop the weapon with a howl of pain. Daniel, younger and less hardened than his associates, immediately dropped his pistol, raising his hands in surrender. "Smart decision," Eleanor commented, quickly securing Fletcher despite his injury. "Your brother Wesley made the same choice. Jackson seems to be running low on reliable lieutenants." With practiced efficiency, she bound Daniel alongside the others, creating an increasingly crowded collection of prisoners in the small office. 5 of Blackwell's key men were now neutralized, dramatically shifting the balance of the ongoing battle. Outside, Jackson was growing increasingly concerned by the silence from the office and the apparent disappearance of multiple team members. The southern group had engaged fully with the town's defenders, but was making minimal progress against the well-prepared defensive positions. "Parker," Sullivan called from his position in the blacksmith shop. "Get word to Cooper. Maintain defensive fire, but don't advance. Mrs. Monroe's strategy is working." The young messenger crawled through the carefully prepared communication trench they had established earlier, delivering instructions while remaining protected from the ongoing exchange of gunfire. In the lumber office, Eleanor prepared for the final phase of her confrontation with Jackson Blackwell. The systematic removal of his key supporters had isolated him tactically, forcing him to function with decreasing effective command. "Your brother is getting desperate," she informed Daniel, conversationally as she checked her ammunition. "He's lost track of 5 men, including both his brothers. Soon he'll have to decide whether to persist in a deteriorating tactical situation or attempt to regroup." Daniel Blackwell, unlike his hardened brothers, showed signs of the fear that Eleanor's methodical efficiency had instilled. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, his youth suddenly apparent in his uncertain voice. "Because you're going to help me end this," Eleanor replied, studying the youngest Blackwell with her penetrating amber gaze. "You're going to call out to your brother and bring him to this office." "He won't come," Daniel asserted, though with less conviction than Wesley had shown. "He'll know it's a trap." "Perhaps," Eleanor acknowledged. "But Jackson has one critical weakness that overrides his tactical judgment. He won't abandon his brothers. That's why you all deserted together, why you've remained unified while your associates have fallen one by one." She moved to the window, calculating distances and angles. "He'll come for you, Daniel. The only question is whether he comes on my terms or his." Outside, Jackson Blackwell had reached a similar conclusion about the situation at the lumber office. Something had happened to both his brothers and several key fighters. The town's resistance was far more formidable than anticipated, suggesting professional military involvement rather than civilian defense. His suspicions crystallized into certainty. Eleanor Monroe hadn't just found refuge in Whispering Pines. She had transformed it into a defensive position specifically designed to counter his tactics. The realization came with grudging professional respect, mingled with cold fury. "Reynolds," he called to one of his remaining experienced fighters. "Take command here. Keep up suppressive fire but conserve ammunition. I'm going to find my brothers." Reynolds, a former cavalry trooper who had ridden with the Blackwells since their desertion, nodded grimly. "What if they're already down, boss?" Jackson's expression hardened. "Then I'll personally kill every person in this town, starting with Eleanor Monroe." As he moved toward the lumber office, using available cover with professional skill, Jackson remained unaware that he was proceeding exactly as Eleanor had predicted, allowing personal concerns to override tactical judgment. In the office, Eleanor positioned Daniel near the window, her revolver pressed against his back. "Call to him," she instructed quietly. "Tell him you're injured but holding the office with Wesley." Daniel hesitated, torn between loyalty to his brother and fear of the cold-eyed woman who had systematically dismantled their attack force. He's coming anyway, Eleanor observed dispassionately. This just determines how many more of your men die before this ends. The young man finally relented, calling out in a convincingly pained voice, "Jack, I'm hit, but we're holding the office. Wesley's hurt bad." Jackson's approach became more urgent at this news, though he maintained tactical discipline, using lumber stacks for cover as he worked his way toward the office. "Hold on, Danny," he called back. "I'm coming to you." Eleanor watched his movement. Through the window, her expression revealing nothing of the anticipation she felt as her 2-year hunt approached its culmination. Jackson Blackwell, the man who had ordered her husband's execution, was moving steadily into the trap she had prepared. As Jackson reached the side of the office, calling again to his brother, Eleanor made a slight adjustment to her position, ensuring optimal firing angles for what would come next. "Tell him to come in through the back door," she instructed Daniel quietly. "Tell him you've secured it against the town's defenders." Daniel, now fully cooperative in the face of Eleanor's implacable determination, called out as directed. "Use the back door, Jack! We've got it secured." Jackson approached the rear entrance, weapon ready but urgency overriding his usual caution. As he pushed through the door, the scene that greeted him confirmed his worst tactical fears. Both his brothers captured, along with 4 of his most reliable men, all under the control of a single opponent. Eleanor Monroe stood across the room, her revolver trained unwaveringly on his chest. For the first time in 2 years, the husband and wife's killer faced the woman who had methodically hunted his associates across 3 territories. "Hello, Jackson," Eleanor said, her voice carrying the quiet certainty of a predator who has finally cornered its prey. "We have unfinished business to discuss." The lumber office fell silent as Eleanor and Jackson Blackwell regarded each other across the room. For a moment that seemed suspended in time, neither spoke, her amber eyes locked with his cold grey ones in a silent acknowledgement of the long journey that had brought them to this confrontation. "You've lost weight since Wyoming," Eleanor observed, her voice unnervingly casual as she maintained her unwavering aim. "Prison rumors apparently weren't good for your appetite." Jackson's expression remained stony, though his eyes flicked briefly to his captured brothers. "Impressive work," he conceded with professional assessment, "neutralizing half my force without a direct confrontation. Thomas taught you well." "Don't speak his name," Eleanor responded, the first hint of emotion entering her voice. "You surrendered the right to mention my husband when you ordered him shot while he was under a flag of truce." Jackson's gaze hardened. He was going to expose our operation, would have seen us all hanged for following orders that the army itself had tacitly approved. "Spare me the justifications," Eleanor cut him off. "I was there, remember? Watched, through my spyglass, as you personally gave the order to fire on 3 unarmed men. Wesley, still bound and gagged in the corner, made muffled sounds of protest. Daniel remained silent, his young face reflecting the dawning realization that the family mythology about his brother's actions had significant omissions. "So what now, Eagle Eye?" Jackson asked, using her scout designation deliberately. "You've spent 2 years hunting us down, killed 7 men already. Is this where you complete your vendetta?" Eleanor's amber eyes revealed nothing of her internal calculations. "That depends entirely on you, Jackson. Drop your weapon and you'll face justice through a proper military tribunal, the same justice Thomas believed in." A harsh laugh escaped Jackson's throat. "Military tribunal? You think I'd let them parade me in front of a court? We both know there are powerful people who'd ensure I never testified about who was really behind our operation." "I'm well aware," Eleanor replied. "Why do you think I've systematically collected evidence from each of your associates before they met their end? The papers Thomas was gathering, the supply manifests, the financial transfers, I have it all now." This revelation visibly shook Jackson's composure. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Eleanor's voice carried absolute certainty. "Why do you think General Hammond retired so suddenly last year? Or why Senator Kellerman withdrew his re-election bid? The evidence is already in circulation, Jackson. Your powerful friends have been abandoning you one by one." Outside, the sound of gunfire had diminished. As both sides assessed the apparent stalemate, Sullivan had received word that Eleanor had successfully trapped Jackson and was now coordinating with Cooper to maintain defensive positions while preventing any rescue attempt by the remaining gang members. Inside the office, Jackson was recalculating his limited options. "You've gone to extraordinary lengths," he observed, "tracking us across 3 territories, creating an elaborate trap in this backwater town. Thomas was my commanding officer, but this level of dedication seems excessive, even for a grieving widow." "This stopped being about grief a long time ago," Eleanor replied, her steady aim never wavering. "This is about justice and preventing men like you from continuing to profit from bloodshed." As they spoke, Eleanor maintained acute awareness of Jackson's subtle movements, the shifting weight, the calculating eyes, measuring distances and angles for a potential desperate action. Despite being cornered, he remained dangerous, a trained military officer with nothing left to lose. "Your men outside are in a deteriorating tactical position," she continued conversationally. "Outnumbered now that we've neutralized your command. Structure surrounded by defenders in superior positions. Running low on ammunition. This ends tonight, one way or another." Jackson's eyes narrowed. "If you were going to shoot me outright, you'd have done it when I walked through that door. So what's your actual play here, Eleanor?" The use of her given name, a deliberate attempt to personalize their confrontation, didn't affect her focus. "My play is to offer you one chance to surrender honorably, to face consequences through proper channels. It's what Thomas would have wanted. And if I refuse this generous offer," Jackson's hand hovered near his holstered pistol, "then I complete what I started in Wyoming," Eleanor stated with chilling simplicity. "Your brothers will stand trial." "You won't." The inherent threat hung in the room's heavy atmosphere. Daniel watched with growing apprehension as his oldest brother and the widow whose life they had destroyed engaged in this lethal negotiation. "Jack," he finally spoke, his voice revealing his youth. "Maybe we should—" "Quiet, Danny," Jackson interrupted sharply, never taking his eyes off Eleanor. "This is between the captain's widow and me." Eleanor recognized the subtle shift in his posture, the almost imperceptible tensing that preceded violent action. Her own body responded with the heightened awareness that had kept her alive through countless dangerous situations. "Your choice," she offered one final time, "but choose quickly." Jackson's decision manifested in explosive motion, dropping to one knee as he drew his pistol with the practiced speed that had built his reputation. Even as his weapon cleared the holster, Eleanor was already responding, her own reflexes honed by years of survival under the harshest conditions. 2 shots rang out in near-perfect unison, the reports so close together they almost sounded as one. Jackson's bullet splintered the wooden wall inches from Eleanor's head. Her shot struck with surgical precision, hitting his gun hand and sending the weapon clattering across the floor. Before he could recover, Eleanor had crossed the distance. Between them, her second revolver pressed against his forehead. "That was your one chance," she said quietly. "The next shot goes through your skull." Blood streaming from his shattered hand, Jackson looked up with a mixture of pain and grudging respect. "You've changed, Eleanor. The scout I knew in Wyoming would have taken the kill shot. The woman you knew died watching her husband murdered." Eleanor replied, "What emerged afterward is something of my own creation." She maintained steady pressure with the revolver. "On your knees, hands behind your head." Outside, Sullivan had heard the shots and was orchestrating a careful approach to the lumber office, unsure of the situation inside. The remaining Blackwell gang members, sensing something had gone critically wrong with their leadership, were beginning to lose cohesion, their fire becoming sporadic and desperate. Within minutes, Sullivan entered the office, taking in the remarkable scene. 5 captured outlaws, including both Blackwell brothers and Jackson himself, kneeling with a bleeding hand, while Eleanor kept him covered. "Marshal," she acknowledged without shifting her attention from her prisoner, "would you be kind enough to secure Mr. Blackwell? He's decided to surrender after all." Sullivan moved forward with practiced efficiency, securing Jackson's hands, despite the wounded one. "Seems you've concluded your business successfully, Mrs. Monroe." "Not quite," Eleanor replied, holstering her revolver once Jackson was secured. "We still have his remaining men to deal with. With the Blackwell brothers captured, the resolution of the larger conflict came with surprising swiftness. Sullivan used Wesley Blackwell, his injuries treated by Dr. Reeves, to deliver instructions to the remaining gang members. Faced with the capture of their leadership and the unexpected strength of the town's defense, most chose surrender over futile resistance. By midnight, the Blackwell gang had been completely neutralized. 17 prisoners were secured in various buildings throughout Whispering Pines, their weapons confiscated, their wounded treated with the same professional care Hannah provided to injured townspeople. In the church that had served as their command center, Eleanor finally permitted herself a moment of genuine exhaustion. The tactical focus that had sustained her through the confrontation ebbed away, leaving the accumulated fatigue of 2 years of vigilance and planning. "You should rest," Hannah advised, checking Eleanor's minor injuries. A bullet graze along her arm and various cuts from splintered wood. "Timothy is safe. The town is secure. Jackson Blackwell is in custody. Allow yourself this victory." Eleanor nodded, though her amber eyes remained alert. "Not yet. I need to retrieve Timothy first. Make sure he knows it's truly over." Sullivan entered, his expression reflecting both weariness and satisfaction. "Army patrol from Fort Harrison will arrive tomorrow to transport the prisoners. I've sent telegraphs to territorial authorities and military commands explaining the situation." "What charges will they face?" Hannah asked, completing her treatment. "Of Eleanor's arm. Murder, attempted murder, desertion, conspiracy," Sullivan listed grimly. "Jackson Blackwell will hang for Captain Monroe's death, assuming the evidence is as comprehensive as Mrs. Monroe suggests." Eleanor rose, checking her weapons from habit rather than immediate necessity. "The evidence will be sufficient, Marshal. I've spent 2 years ensuring that." As dawn approached, Eleanor rode north toward the hidden cave where Timothy waited. The journey through the awakening forest carried a different quality than her tactical movements of the previous day, a lightness that came from the knowledge that her son would never again need to flee in the night, never again practice emergency protocols for separation. She approached the hidden entrance with deliberate noise, calling out the recognition phrases they had established. "Eagle's nest, morning sun. Clear skies for flying," came Timothy's immediate response from within the concealed opening. He emerged cautiously, his small face showing the discipline she had instilled alongside the natural relief at seeing his mother. When she dismounted, however, the careful control gave way to childhood emotion as he ran to her, throwing his arms around her waist. "You're okay," he breathed, his amber eyes, so like her own, scanning her for injuries. "Did you get the bad men?" Eleanor knelt to his level, allowing herself to be fully present as his mother, rather than the tactical commander she had been for the past day. "Yes, Timothy. We got them all, including the men who hurt your father." The boy processed this information with the solemn thoughtfulness that sometimes made him seem older than his 7 years. "So we don't have to run anymore. We can stay in Whispering Pines." "Yes," she confirmed, smoothing his hair gently. "This is our home now, permanently." As they rode back toward town, Timothy sitting before her on the saddle, Eleanor found herself studying the landscape with different eyes. For 2 years, every forest had represented potential ambush points, every open field a vulnerable crossing, every settlement a temporary haven at best. Now, for the first time since Thomas's death, she could see the beauty of the Montana Territory without automatically calculating tactical advantages. They crested the final ridge overlooking Whispering Pines, the morning sun illuminating the settlement below. Despite signs of the previous night's battle, damaged buildings, defensive barricades still in place, the town had survived largely intact. Smoke rose peacefully from chimneys as life cautiously resumed its normal patterns. "It looks different," Timothy observed thoughtfully. "How so?" Eleanor asked, interested in her son's perception. He considered the question with characteristic care before answering. "Before, it was just a hiding place. Now it looks like somewhere we belong." The insight, so simply expressed yet profound, in its understanding, touched Eleanor deeply. "You're right," she agreed softly. "It does look like home now." They rode down into town, where the aftermath of battle was being addressed with frontier efficiency. Damaged structures were already under repair, the wounded were receiving care in Dr. Reeves' clinic, and Marshal Sullivan was coordinating the secure holding of prisoners until the army patrol arrived. The citizens of Whispering Pines regarded Eleanor with a mixture of awe, gratitude, and newfound understanding as she passed. The quiet widow who had lived among them for 8 months had revealed herself as something extraordinary, a tactical genius whose preparation and courage had saved their community from destruction. Benjamin Cooper approached as she dismounted, outside the mercantile, helping Timothy down with careful hands. "Mrs. Monroe," he greeted, the formal address now carrying a note of respect beyond mere courtesy. "Or should I say, Eagle Eye?" Eleanor accepted both the greeting and the subtle acknowledgement of her revealed identity. "Eleanor is still perfectly acceptable, Mr. Cooper, though I suspect it will take some time for the town to adjust to knowing the truth." Cooper nodded thoughtfully. "People are resilient, especially frontier folk. They understand that out here, everyone has a past they don't speak of." He smiled at Timothy. "Young man, I believe Miss Foster saved some breakfast for you at the schoolhouse. She's gathering the children there while the parents finish securing the town." As Timothy went ahead after receiving his mother's approving nod, Cooper turned. "Back to Eleanor. Sullivan mentioned you might be leaving once the army takes custody of the Blackwells, something about testifying at their trial." "Temporarily," Eleanor confirmed. "My testimony will be necessary to ensure justice is properly served, but we'll return." Her amber eyes surveyed the town that had become something more than a hiding place. "Whispering Pines is our home now." The arrival of the army patrol the following day brought a mixture of relief and complex emotions for Eleanor. Captain James Forrester, who led the detail, had served with Thomas before his death and recognized Eleanor immediately despite the years that had passed. "Mrs. Monroe," he greeted formally, though his eyes conveyed deeper understanding. "The War Department will be very interested in your testimony regarding these men." "I'm sure they will, Captain," Eleanor replied with equal formality, though perhaps not as interested in the complete evidence I've assembled regarding who was ultimately directing their weapons trafficking. Forrester's expression revealed nothing, but his slightly straightened posture acknowledged the implicit challenge in her statement. "I assure you, ma'am, the military justice system will pursue this matter to its full conclusion, regardless of where it leads." "I'll hold you to that promise," Eleanor stated quietly. "Thomas deserves nothing less." The transfer of prisoners proceeded with military precision. Jackson Blackwell, his wounded hand properly treated but his expression still defiant, passed Eleanor as the soldiers led him to the transport wagon. "This isn't the end," he stated coldly. "Men like me don't disappear without consequences." Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. "Men like you already have disappeared, Jackson. 7 of them, to be precise. You're simply the last in a series of necessary conclusions." As the patrol prepared to depart with their prisoners, Sullivan approached Eleanor with news that complicated her immediate plans. "Territorial Governor's Office telegraphed," he informed her. "They've requested you remain here for the initial deposition rather than traveling to Fort Harrison. Judge Hollister is being dispatched to take your testimony directly." Eleanor considered this development with cautious optimism. That's unusual protocol for military deserters. "Apparently," Sullivan replied, choosing his words carefully, "certain aspects of your collected evidence have raised significant concerns at higher levels. The governor specifically mentioned ensuring your testimony isn't lost in transit." The implication was clear. Her methodical documentation of the corruption behind the Blackwell's operation had reached influential ears, and legitimate authorities were now moving to protect both the evidence and its primary witness. 2 weeks later, as Judge Hollister concluded the exhaustive deposition process that had documented every aspect of the Blackwell case, Eleanor found herself standing on the porch of her cabin, watching Timothy help Benjamin Cooper repair the fence damaged during the confrontation. "He's adapting well," Hannah observed, joining her with 2 cups of coffee. "Children are remarkably resilient when given stability and truth." Eleanor accepted the coffee gratefully. "I worried that knowing the full story of his father's death might be too much for him, but hiding it seemed worse somehow. You've given him something many children never receive," the doctor noted thoughtfully. "The certainty that justice will be served, that wrong actions have consequences. That's a powerful foundation for a young life." In the weeks that followed, Whispering Pines gradually resumed its normal rhythms, though permanently changed by the night the Blackwell gang had come calling. The town's successful defense had created a new sense of community solidarity, while Eleanor's revealed identity as the legendary scout Eagle Eye had transformed her position from tolerated widow to respected tactical advisor. Sullivan, recognizing her exceptional abilities, had formally requested her assistance in training his deputies and establishing more effective security protocols for the growing settlement. The territorial governor, impressed by her detailed testimony against the Blackwells and their corrupt military sponsors, had offered her a position as special consultant on frontier security matters, a role she could fill while maintaining her home in Whispering Pines. On a crisp autumn morning, 6 months after the Blackwell confrontation, Eleanor stood at Thomas's symbolic grave marker, a simple stone she had placed on a ridge overlooking the valley. Timothy waited respectfully some distance away, allowing his mother this private moment. "It's done, Thomas," she said quietly too. "The marker. Jackson and Wesley will hang next week. Daniel received 20 years due to his age and peripheral involvement. The generals who authorized the weapons trafficking have been court-martialed. Senator Kellerman has been indicted." The mountain breeze caught her words, carrying them across the valley she now called home. "You always believed justice would prevail through proper channels. You were right in the end, though the path was longer and bloodier than either of us could have imagined." She placed a small, carved wooden eagle, Timothy's handiwork, atop the stone marker. "We have a home now, a real one, not just a temporary shelter. Timothy is thriving in school. Miss Foster says he has your mind for mathematics." In the distance, the church bell in Whispering Pines began to ring, signaling the start of the harvest festival. Eleanor touched the stone one final time before turning away. "We're going to be okay, Thomas," she concluded softly. "You can rest now. We both can." As she rejoined Timothy, taking his small hand in hers, Eleanor Monroe, widow, mother, legendary scout, looked across the valley with her remarkable amber eyes. For the first time in years, she saw not tactical positions or potential threats, but simply a beautiful landscape and a community she had chosen to call home. The hunters were gone. The prey had not only survived but triumphed, and in that victory, Eleanor had reclaimed not just justice for her husband, but a future for her son, and perhaps, finally, peace for herself. "Come on, Timothy," she said, her voice carrying a warmth that had been absent during their years of flight. "Let's go home."
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.